Dude, this is a day that we've been waiting for a while now, it seems like.
I'm really excited.
Yeah, so I was waiting for a press release Wednesday, nothing happened. Thursday, same thing, and I think it was 10:30 Friday morning, the day before the Fox Raceway National. We finally got them, the 2025 Honda CRF lineup. Super stoked because there's a lot to unpack here.
There is, man, and they gave us really every model we really would want to see information for. The motocross models, the Works Edition models, and their off-road models.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just jump right on into it. The new bike for this year is the all-new CRF250R WE or Works Edition.
Yes.
They've only had that in the 450 trim model now for how many years now? I think since like 2019, I want to say.
2019 is the first year for it, yeah.
So, it's taken a few years to get to this point with the 250, but nonetheless, it is here now and should be in dealers maybe this fall, I would hope. But it's cool to see that the CRF 250R took up, or the Works Edition that is, took up the same modifications that the 450 has as well.
Yeah, now you got both the 250 and 450 running the same frame, suspension, all the same updates. There's no longer that year behind lag that they have had in the past, and other manufacturers often do as well.
Yeah, and then the upgrades that come with the Works Edition, you get a red cylinder head cover, which is really nice. A coated fork, Kashima coated fork on the upper tubes.
Yes.
And then you get a titanium oxidized lowers. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's the black tube. Usually black tubes are DLC coated, but you can also get it coated with titanium oxide as well.
Got it.
Given the choice, I would choose DLC. It's hard to beat carbon when it comes to what you choose to coat something with, but we'll discuss that in another video.
Yeah, and then of course you also get the DID LTX rims as well, throttle jockey seat cover, and race team inspired graphics. Super nice touch. The Henson clutch cover, the Henson clutch basket.
Yep.
Yoshimura RS12 full exhaust system. Honda's really taking care of their customers with these Works Edition models. Yeah,
and it looks like they got finger adjusters on top of the fork caps. The fork cap has a nice red look to it. I think it even looks engraved with like the Showa logo. And then on the rear shock, it looks like the shock adjuster housing is anodized, a cool red color. And it looks like they're still utilizing the upgraded 18mm shock shaft assembly for the Works Editions also. So yeah, they've done a good job improving that Works Edition model year over year in what they're doing to it.
Yeah, and then one more quick addition to the CRF250R Works Edition. That bike comes stock with the stock trim model of that bike comes stock with a cable clutch. On the Works Edition, there is an option for a different ignition cover to where you can run a hydraulic clutch, which is a really nice upgrade.
Interesting.
Yeah, for those riders. Some people prefer the cable or the hydro, so that's up to rider preference, but it is cool to have that option.
That really is. Yeah, I'd always personally go with the hydraulic clutch. Maybe that's just because how much time I spent on KTMs and Husqvarnas and gases now.
Yeah.
But options are awesome, especially when it comes to rider. Everybody is different, so to have that ability, I think that's really neat. I haven't seen any other manufacturer offer that in the past, at least in an OEM format.
Yeah, I think Yamaha did in 2023 with the YZ450F when they introduced that bike.
Okay.
It came stock with the cable clutch, if I remember correctly, and you could upgrade to the hydro or vice versa. Real quick, before we move on, actually, let's touch on the price. So it's $12,599 for the CRF450R Works Edition.
Okay.
And the CRF450R stock trim level is $96.99. Some people might have a hard time jumping up to that, but if you were to price out the coatings on the suspension, the RS12 exhaust, the clutch basket, the clutch cover, all that other goodies that you get, I mean, you're well over that price difference. So if you are going to do those mods to your CRF50R, you may as well get that Works Edition if you can get a good deal.
Yeah, no, agreed, man. We our Honda CRF demo forks we have, I just bought the Works Edition forks because it was cheaper to buy those than for me to buy OEM forks and have us send them out and get them coated. So there's definitely an advantage cost-wise to getting the Works Edition if you're going to be going that route with some suspension coatings and other upgrades as you alluded to as well.
For sure. And then to touch on the 250 price point, it's $82.99. If you want to jump up to that Works Edition, it is $10,599.
So what else we got for the updates that pretty much cover all the models, stock trim and Works Edition?
Yeah, so the chassis is heavily revised for this year. So about a month and a half ago, maybe even 2 months ago, we did a sneak peek preview of this bike. We looked at Tim Geischer's bike, Ruben Fernandez's bike in the MXGP series. We kind of went over some of that. So if you want to go ahead and watch that video, you can as well. But a lot of what we talked about in that video video also translates to this production bike.
For sure.
Yeah, at the time of that filming, we didn't have much knowledge of the production bike, but now that it's here, press releases are out, we can go ahead and sift through all of what they've changed. So we do see 3 different mounting points for the subframe now. One of the reasons for that is to optimize the rigidity balance of the bike. Hondas have been notoriously known for being kind of sketchy, twitchy, nervous feeling.
On the front end is what you're referring to.
Yes, on the front end. And the whole purpose for not only the subframe changes, but also they're running the braced frame, which we will get into in a minute, to optimize the rigidity balance between this whole motorcycle. So again, 3 different contact points for the subframe, and then moving on towards the front of the bike. I'll put a picture of Jet Lawrence's bike from last year's Pro Motocross season. We were calling that the brace frame. That added material onto the headstay of the frame down towards the bottom of the engine cradle got translated to this production bike as well. So it's cool to see some of the factory bits that not only the MXGP team, but also the US HRC Honda team was using translate all the way down to the production bike. So seeing that is new. It's 70% different from the outgoing frame of the main actual chassis. They are using the same swing arm, which is important to note. Since they've changed the frame that much. So again, 70% of the frame is different, but they are still using that same swing arm.
Okay, cool. Interesting. Good way to put that. Yeah, that's, so I remember 2 years ago, Chase Sexton had, I don't want to say issues, but he was very vocal about the front end of his bike, and they worked on it a lot. So it's cool to see Honda taking that to heart and the updates and changes that they did to the frame. I wish they could be a little more revealing on exactly what they did and why. Understandably, they're probably not going to be, but we can definitely guess. A while ago, I guessed, well, they talked about Chase having an issue with the front end kind of snapping back, and they talked about how they braced the frame to do that. And I think it was Ryan Ritter's podcast, Motopub. I talked about how if something flexes a lot, it's going to snap back the equal amount. So it might sound counterintuitively, but if you were to stiffen up the frame a little bit, it's not going to flex as much, nor is it going to snap back as much after flexing. In other words, just think of it as the more you pull a rubber band back, the harder it's going to snap back. So in this case, the rubber band being the frame isn't going to be bending as much. Instead, it's going to probably make the suspension work a lot more, meaning going to be compressing as it should. I'm sure Honda did probably a mix of things in terms of where it's stiffer and maybe where it's a little softer at, but that's something that's really hard for us to do on the aftermarket, meaning tweak and tune a frame. So it's awesome to see it come from the factory level of the manufacturer and see what they do in terms of improving it. Usually they always go in the right direction. So I'm excited to see what this new frame feels like when we eventually get to ride these new bikes.
Because again, it's 70% different. So I wonder if it's gonna have the similar feeling, but what they're really going after is getting more of a traction feeling, more calm, balanced, and stable chassis out of the CRF450R. So I wonder if it's gonna be what we love about that Honda, where how it turns really well, but also have the stability, the straight line stability of like a Yamaha YZ450F or a different bike in the field. So I wonder if they're kind of going after, if they're able to achieve both, or if it's maybe a compromise on one to gain in another area.
I would think also, because suspension has a huge influence on how a bike feels, how twitchy it is, how much it moves. I'm gonna guess with their updated valving settings that they did and that they're advertising, we'll get that into a bit. Between that and the frame, the bike's probably gonna be working a lot better. It'd also be hard to know what improved what. Did the frame make that much of a difference, or did the suspension changes make that much of a difference?
And speaking of suspension changes, I believe there's a new shock spring on this bike and a reservoir shaft.
Yeah, it looks like it did a few things. So they're advertising, we'll go with the forks first. It says new springs. So I'm curious, do they mean new spring rates or a new spring design? And by that, I mean length of spring. Over the years, manufacturers have altered the length of the fork spring. The reason they do that is that influences when the spring perch engages the oil inside of the fork. The longer the spring, the more delayed or the later the spring perch is going to engage the oil in the outer chamber. The shorter the spring, the sooner it will. If we look back and just what's happened over time, most manufacturers have gone to a longer spring. Right now, the spring length on that is 475 millimeters long. That applies from the 17 model all the way up to the 2024 model. So again, I'm curious, is it new spring rates or do they actually change the length of the spring? They also are advertising bending control valves. I'm curious what that is. My guess is going to be a leaf spring style mid valve in the mid valve of the fork. This is purely a guess. I've never heard anybody call it bending control valves, but I can't think of anywhere else that type of valve or what else they'd be referring to inside of the fork, unless that's a totally new style of valve, which that'd be even cool. That'd be cooler as well if it's something totally new and for something for us to learn from. So that's the new stuff on the forks. On the shock, as you said, yeah, it says new shock spring. So I'm curious, is it a new spring rate and or is it a new spring design? From 2017 to 2024, the length of the spring was 240 millimeters long. A pretty short spring and a pretty light spring in terms of weight. So I'm curious, is that the same or did they alter that? And if they did, why? And then, yeah, they're also advertising a updated reservoir tank, so nitrogen tank. Did they make it smaller volume or larger volume? And they're also advertising a new shaft. So my question is, do all the models have an 18 millimeter shaft now, or just the Works editions, and do the standard bikes still have a 16 millimeter shaft? If all the models feature an 18 millimeter shaft, then my guess would be the reservoirs in larger volume. Reason for that is the bigger shaft's going to displace more oil as the shock compresses. So because of that, you likely want to have a little bit more volume in the nitrogen, aka reservoir side of the shock to match that. So that'd be my guess, but we won't know for sure until we see it. And then the last piece of the puzzle is the linkage design. It is now back to a one-piece dog bone or U-shape, and it is advertised as less pitching and more bottoming. Less pitching means it's going to be firmer, harder to compress. Because if a bike pitches a lot, it means it's using a lot of movement out of the chassis. So less pitching is going to mean firmer. And that ties in exactly with them also saying more bottoming resistance. So the linkage is revised in terms of the design of the linkage and also, let's say, the linkage curve, or I like to say the leverage curve. That's a more accurate way of putting it. But I want to know, is it changed enough for different spring rates? Because when you change a linkage or a leverage curve enough, you have to change spring rates. Oftentimes, a lot of manufacturers just kind of fine tweak and tune the linkage and not enough to where it requires a different spring rate. And that's the most telling part. If it needs a spring rate, it's been changed a lot. If it doesn't need a spring rate, then it's just only minorly been changed. I'm not saying that's bad or good, just trying to be transparent and make it clear to how subtle or how noticeable these changes could be at the suspension. And then the last part, which I'm stoked on, is the rear shock removal is being advertised as being a lot easier to do thanks to the, I think, new Airbox design.
Yes.
That's on there. So that's going to be great for everybody here at the shop, for us removing shocks all the time, and you at home when you're working on your bike as well. I'm stoked to see them take into account just people working on their bikes and the ease of working on their bike.
For sure, yeah. So you no longer have to remove the subframe to pull the shock out, which is really nice. So it cuts like the time in half. Is essentially what they are saying. So yeah, I'm glad you touched on that. The new Airbox design. New Airbox design for this year. So the panel is a little bit different. I'm sure the air filter itself, the cage, the boot is all different as well. There's not a whole lot of info on that.
We were kind of guessing that in our video.
Yes.
Where we were kind of just foreshadowing what may be coming out.
Exactly. Along with that, there is a new exhaust design, but the engine itself is identical.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so it's cool to see them keep the same motor package or engine package, but just refine it a little bit with as far as the air coming into the engine and going out of the engine.
Awesome. Yeah, and from what I've seen from some of the engine tuners, they have been doing some modifications to the airboxes on the 23 and 24 models. So I'm curious how similar that is to what's on the 25s.
Last thing I want to touch on real quick is the striking new look. Now it does utilize the exact same front and rear fenders along with the same front number plate, but the shroud to the side plate is different.
Okay.
Yeah, so it has a more of like a retro look to it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I feel about it. The bike does look really, really good, but I'm not sure how I feel about the shroud. I like the side plate. I like the front fender, the rear fender, the front number plate and everything, but the shroud is going to take me a little bit of time to get used to, but it does look good.
Yeah, I like how exposed everything is. To me, that just screams lightness. And you can kind of like see through a bike. You can see holes in it. You can see through it in some spots. To me, again, that just screams lightness and like it handles. I think we're going to see some really cool retro builds with these 25 models. Yeah, I think we're seeing really cool retro builds with that. So I'll be excited to see that.
Yeah, definitely. So comment down below what if you were going to pick up a 2025 CRF model bike, and which one you would buy. Would you opt for the stock trim model? Again, that's like a CRF250R or CRF450R, or would you jump up an extra $1,900 or more for the Works Edition bike?
What would you choose?
Dude, honestly, if I could get it for like no markup, none of that fluff on it, I think I would do the Works Edition.
Hard to pass. I feel you.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
250 or 450?
Ooh, I would get a 450. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard stepping back down to a 250 after you've ridden a 350 for a while. And in my case, I have. And I currently own a KX 450, so I'd be really keen on the 450.
Yeah, agreed, man. I would be all over that 450 Works Edition. It's looks like an awesome bike, and if Honda has just continued their progression as they have over the years, then this 25 is going to be an awesome bike, and I can't wait to see the shootouts when all the magazines get to test these bikes back to back. I think Honda's got a very competitive bike on their hands just based on the information that we have on paper right now, and I'm excited to see more of the details come out over time.
Absolutely. Well, again, comment down below which bike you would buy. And if you like this content, make sure to subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell, and give us a like on this video. We will see you guys in the next episode of Shop Talk or our race previews. Make sure to subscribe again. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.